Welcome back to the franchise. This is Rick Goslin and I'm Charean Williams, and we are DFW's Hall of Fame voters. And today we got a segment on leadership and youth. And Goose, when you look at what the Oakland Raiders have done under John Gruden, they've kind of been a throwback to the old maybe Washington Redskins, but some of those teams in the past that really are old teams. But most teams are going young nowadays.
Yeah, historically, football was an older man's game. You look at the Packers, they won 5 championships with, by and large, the same players, the Steelers. The teams that won Super Bowls, the players who won Super Bowls in 74 also were there in 79. There was no cap on money, so you could have older players, you could have older players as backups, but that all changed in 1994 when the salary cap came in. It became a young man's game. You can't pay all your older players millions of dollars. So the average age has been dropping. As a matter of fact, the Redskins won the Super Bowl in 1991. The average age of the starting lineup was 28.5 years. And that was by and large what the league averaged, in the 28s. Cowboys changed all that. Jimmy came in and had the youngest team in football in 1992. I think it was 26.5 years, won the Super Bowl. Youngest, deepest, strongest, most talented team. And that started the trend, and the cap came, and you had to get younger. And the Packers in 1996, 26.5 years. The Rams in 1999, 26.6 years. And you had to get younger because you couldn't afford to pay all your older players.
Well, and we've seen what the Cowboys have done, and you look at their core, and they've got 2 really young players that they're building around in Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. And to me, the big thing about that is, you talked about the salary cap, that's a big deal when you don't have to pay those guys gazillions of dollars. You have a chance to make the depth better because you have more money spread out to spend elsewhere. And I think that's something, they've got 1 more year of that before they have to pay Dak Prescott, and 2 to 3 more years before they have to pay Ezekiel Elliott, depending on the option year.
Yeah, that's the key. With a young quarterback, you have essentially 3 years to clean up your cap. Yeah. And that's what the Cowboys should have been doing these last 3 years. You're not paying the one quarterback the big money. The correlation would be the 2013 Seahawks that won the Super Bowl. They're the only team in NFL history to win the Super Bowl with an average age under 26. 25.8 years was the starting lineup. That's because they had a young quarterback. They had a young Marshawn Lynch. And that's what the Cowboys have right now with Prescott and Elliott. They've got a young core. If they can keep this core together in 26, 27, 28, 29, they're going to have about a 4-year window if the pieces are in place to make a run.
We go back to being young. Part of being young is obviously drafting, and drafting well. Do you think that's sort of been a turnaround for the Cowboys too, is that they've drafted better, maybe since Will McClay came in, but over the last few years they've drafted better to get those young players in here?
Yeah, that was the demise of the team in the 1990s. They were an older team, and they were drafting poorly. In a salary cap comes, you have to draft well. Your young players have to make the roster. The Cowboys were terrible drafters in the 1990s, and that's why that whole thing went in a steady spiral down. In recent time, even in 2000 they struggled, but in recent time with Will McClay, they've drafted better players. Younger players are coming in and starting earlier, and now they have a good young nucleus in place. I think there's only one starter on opening day who will be 30 years of age or older, and that's right, Sean Lee. The last team to do that was the 2016 Rams. There wasn't a team last year in the NFL that had only one starter at the age of 30. So they're in position with a young team to put together a 4 or 5 year run if the right pieces are in place, if the pass rusher is there, if the takeaways are there, if the wide receivers can step up.
Yeah, I talked to Sean Lee about that in Oxnard, about being the old guy, and he says, I don't feel like the old guy, but obviously on this team, he is the old guy with the retirement of Jason Witten and the moving on of some other players. One last thing in this segment, Goose, let's go back to the Raiders now. The Raiders, there's been this whole youth movement in the league. Now the Raiders have gone back to the old way of doing things, which is getting players over the age of 30, and they're going to try to win the way that George Allen tried to win with the Redskins way back in the day with older players. Do you think, in this day and age of youth, can it be done? Can they win with an old team?
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. You're paying, there's a minimum salary you have to pay as the older you get, and you get a bunch of guys at 30. I question Gruden's philosophy this go around. He was able to do it to a point in Tampa. But that was 2002. That was a long time ago. This is now a young man's game. And if the Raiders don't embrace that philosophy, they're going to struggle.
When we come back, we are going to head out to Oxnard for an interview with one of the Cowboys' key defenders this season. We're here with Jeff Heath, safety for the Cowboys. Jeff, how much did starting last year give you experience just in that role, being out there and being a leader?
Yeah, obviously the more time you get on the field, the more comfortable you can become as a player. I think that's really the only way to grow in the league is by doing it. Sometimes you're in the hard way, sometimes you have success, you have adversity, but as long as you handle both of those the right way, then hopefully you grow as a player.
Has the time just kind of flown by from your first training camp?
Absolutely. I can remember my first training camp very specifically, all the feelings, all the emotions that, you're just going through your head when this is so new. So, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but then when you look back and, look at all the practices, all the games, you realize that you've been here for a while.
You guys have had some changes in the secondary. Obviously, Orlando Skandrick is gone, and you've had Byron Jones move to cornerback. How's that going to affect you guys back there, and how much confidence do you have in that secondary?
Man, we have a ton of confidence in really everybody in our room. We may be young, but I think we have the right kind of guys. We have the right attitude, athleticism, skill, ability, the want to learn. We have all of it. And we have great direction with Coach Richard. So I'm really excited about this group. Obviously, anytime you lose a guy with Orlando's, leadership and Orlando's, what's the word I'm looking for? He's just been around for experience. Yeah, he's just been around for so long. Anytime you lose a guy like that, it's tough. But I think we have the right guys to, step in and play well.
How much do you know about the helmet rule and what they're going to call and how they're going to enforce it? I know you guys have a meeting with the officials.
The only thing I know right now is it sounds a lot like the college rule, where they'll eject you if they deem it to be unnecessary roughness or whatever. I'm interested to see how that goes. It's really hard to change the way you've been playing after 20 years, and you're not always thinking about where you're hitting somebody. You're just trying to get them down. So as soon as you start thinking, second guessing yourself, I think that's when trouble happens. So hopefully it does the job and keeping players safe, but does not result in a lot of ejections.
Welcome back to this segment of the franchise. This is Rick Goslin. I'm Charean Williams, and we're back in our studios in Frisco. And the first segment we talked about youth and the youth movement. In this segment, we're going to talk about leadership, which obviously entails a little bit older players. Jason Witten obviously was the leader of that football team for a really long time. And if you go back even a couple of years, it was Tony Romo, and before that it was DeMarco Murray, and they've had some real leaders on this team. But now, with Witten's retirement, who's going to step up and fill that leadership void for the Cowboys?
That's a huge void to fill, because not only was Witten the face of the franchise in the post-game locker room, he was the go-to guy for writers. When the writers left the locker room, he was the guy his teammates listened to. You need to have skins on the wall, which Witten had. And I think we said earlier, Sean Lee is that guy. He's the elder statesman on this roster. He's been to a Pro Bowl. He's the guy that makes the defense work. So he's got to step up, and I think he's done that. You've visited with him. He's stepped up. He's accepted that role. I think he had that role at Penn State, so I think he's very comfortable in that role.
Well, when I was out in Oxnard, obviously the Des Bryant stuff all hit with Des ripping his former team, and Sean Lee, who was called Snake Lee by Des Bryant, stepped up and said the right things and wanted to hold Des accountable and said he needed to be more accountable. I think, to me, that's the first time that Sean Lee has shown real leadership, and I think we're going to see that throughout. Sean Lee was not a guy who showed up in the locker room and did interviews and said things like that in the past, but I think he knows he has to fill that void this season because they don't have that otherwise.
I think Des Bryant identified the leaders.
Yeah.
When he called out Sean Lee and he called out Travis Frederick, I'm sure he called him out because they were asking him to do something he did not want to do or was not capable of doing. They were holding him to a higher standard. They were holding him to the Sean Lee and Travis Frederick Pro Bowl standard. You have to be a Pro Bowl player on and off the field. You have to be a Pro Bowl player on the sidelines as well as on the field. Des didn't like that. That showed me the leadership skills of both Frederick and Lee. They're not afraid to call out one of the team's stars.
Yeah, and you can't show up late to meetings and practices and all those sorts of things. You got to be on time and accountable to your teammates. Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott both say they're trying to be leaders. They're obviously very young players, but you need your quarterback to be a leader, right, Goose? I mean, if Dak Prescott isn't the leader of the offense, that offense is probably in a little bit of trouble.
And I think he's fine. I like Dak Prescott's intangibles more than I like his tangibles. I mean, this is what he was at Mississippi State. He could always rally the troops. He overachieved with that team at Mississippi State. Your quarterback has to be a leader. Russell Wilson walked in on that Seattle team as a rookie. Boom, he was the leader right away. And I think Dak was to establish himself as a leader his rookie season. Now, he had the performance to back it, but now he's got to accept even more of the role. With Witten gone, he's now the face of that offense. He's the guy that everybody's going to want to talk to after the game, that all the network's going to want to talk to. He's got to give his teammates and the media the pulse of that locker room. And he's got to have a feel for this team and whether they can produce that week or not.
It's kind of a funny team to me because when I was out in Oxnard and I'm looking around trying to identify the stars, this team always has stars. It's Dak Prescott and it's Ezekiel Elliott and maybe Sean Lee, maybe DeMarcus Lawrence, but they don't have the stars to me like they did in the past. Now, Tony Romo made a really good point. He said Miles Austin wasn't Miles Austin until his breakout year, and he expects some people to break out on this team. But when you look around that team, it's those two guys. And Ezekiel Elliott is sort of out of his element to be a leader, I think. I don't think that's in his DNA, but he's trying really hard to do that.
No, and you look at around the league, the leaders are your high-paid offensive skill players. The Cowboys have so much money invested in the offensive line. Those are the guys that have to be leaders. That's where Travis Frederick is going to step up. I think Zach Martin has got those skills. I'm not sure Tyron Smith is a leadership type guy, but I think in Zach Martin and Travis Frederick, these are the guys that can hold people accountable. And I think that's where you have to look. You can't look at a receiver. You can't look at a running back. You can't look at a defensive back. You got to look at a front seven player on defense and a front five player on offense. And those offensive linemen, Sean Lee, possibly Tyron Crawford. He's been around. You think he's got some leadership skills, but what he lacks is the skins on the wall.
All right, let's go to the back end of the defense. I don't see a leader on that defense. Maybe Jeff Heath needs to take over that role. If they get Earl Thomas, obviously he's going to be the guy to do that. But do they need a leader on the backside of the defense? Do you have a leader back there? John Lynch, for instance, when Ron Marinelli was in Tampa, he was the guy.
Yeah, I think Jeff Heath can assume that role because he has play to back up his words. He's been one of the few playmakers on that defense. He comes up with takeaways. He comes up with big hits. That he saved the Oakland game with that tackle on Carr. He intercepted Aaron Rodgers in a playoff game at Green Bay. He makes plays. That's how people look, your teammates look up to you. Is he making plays? Is he helping me win games? And you saw what Heath did. He wrote that letter to the league office on Randy Gregory's behalf. I think he's trying to assume part of that leadership void that Witten has left, and I think he's doing a good job. But I'd be surprised if he's not a team captain.
The Cowboys need leaders. They have the youth. We'll see what else they have this season. We'll join you again soon for another segment of the franchise. Thank you for joining us.